We will now take a few minutes to allow anyone in the room who is an elected office holder or anyone who has declared and is running for office to introduce themselves. If you are an elected office holder or if you have declared and are running for office, we invite you to come to the mic to the side there. Briefly introduce yourself with your name, title, and position. And if the audience would please hold any applause until everyone has introduced themselves, we'd appreciate it. Is
that better? There you go. Doug Walker, Orange County Judge.
Good morning, Amanda Bova, Orange County Judge.
Good morning, I'm Todd Weaver, Winter Park City Commissioner.
Hello, I'm Marty Sullivan, City Winter Park Commissioner.
Hi, I'm Melissa Vickers. I'm running for Public Defender for the 9th Judicial Circuit, which is Orange and Osceola County.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Carter, an Orange County Judge.
Good morning, everybody. State Representative Rita Harris, proudly serving House District 44.
And even though she did not go to the mic, I'd like to let everyone know that Angie Garner is here, the mayor of Eatonville. Welcome, Angie. I'd now like to acknowledge our sponsors. We are delighted to have two sponsors to announce this morning, our platinum sponsor and a bronze sponsor. We are so pleased to welcome Lynn and David Barrelsman as our first bronze sponsor. And David, if you would please stand. Thank you so much for supporting the league. Representing our platinum sponsor and Climate First Bank, we have Jeff Cowherd, the Executive Vice President for Climate First, and his team. Thank you for being our platinum sponsors. The mission of Climate First Bank is to do the right thing for the planet, people, community, and their shareholders. As a mission-driven organization, Climate First is honored to sponsor this event and believes conversations like today's are very important and more important than ever. Please speak with them today about how they can help you use your finance as a force for good and impact voting through your wallet. Please visit their table to the side and find out more about their products. Low wages, rising property values, the skyrocketing cost of living, a shortage of housing, and other things are making it an absolutely perfect storm for workers, families, and many others, especially those on fixed incomes, to make it in today's economic environment. The League of Women Voters of Orange County wants to know what is being done long-term to address the problem of housing that's affordable, and what kinds of communities can make a difference in people's lives long-term. As it happens, we have examples of some of these communities right here in Orange County. And today's Hot Topics program highlights two innovative solutions to housing and how they work with the community and with government. To lead this discussion, we are very pleased to have Beth Kassab as our moderator. Beth is a Central Florida native. You can hold your applause. She's a Central Florida native and a longtime journalist who has devoted her entire career to local news. She arrived at the Winter Park Voice this year with a strong passion for telling the stories of people and organizations that define this region. Beth spent over 20 years, as many of you know, at the Orlando Sentinel, where she covered politics, education, courts, business, and local government. She also wrote a very popular column. In addition, she has been a regular presence on local and national TV. So to begin today's program, please join me in welcoming Beth Kassab to the podium.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, to the League and to our panelists for being here. I am a longtime journalist, so I'm probably going to need my glasses for part of the script. So I'd love to start out today by introducing the panelists who will join me for this discussion. I want to start with Terry Prather, Senior Advisor for Lift Orlando. Terry is a founding board member and senior advisor of Lift Orlando, a place-based community development organization that strengthens neighborhoods so people can thrive. In 2019, Terry also co-chaired the Housing for All Task Force for Orange County, and this task force of 38 citizens developed an action plan that received unanimous approval from the Orange County Board of Commissioners. Terry retired from SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment in 2015, where he served as president of SeaWorld Orlando. He currently serves as chair of the Visit Orlando Board of Directors and as the board chair for Dr. Phillips Charities. Throughout his career, he has served on several community boards and associations. Thank you so much, Terry. Next, I'd like to introduce Ryan Von Weller. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Wendover Housing Partners. He is a commercial real estate broker responsible for Wendover's multifamily and residential development throughout the state of Florida. With more than 15 years of experience in the areas of site selection, land contract negotiations, land valuation, and project planning and development, Von Weller joined Wendover in 2014. He graduated from the University of Florida, go Gators, and earned his MBA at Rollins. And finally, somebody who I remember talking to as a little baby journalist, Mitchell Glasser, manager of Orange County Housing and Community Development. Mitchell's division is responsible for administering all the federal, state, and local housing programs for Orange County, Florida. Some of those programs include Community Development Block Grants, the Home Investment Partnership, the State Housing Initiatives Partnership Program, and Orange County's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We'll get to a lot of that today. Mr. Glasser has over 30 years of experience with affordable housing and community development programs. He serves on various boards and is past president of the National Association of County Community and Economic Development. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So thanks, everybody, and we're going to just dive into some questions here. Thankfully, the League is really good about keeping track of time, so we're going to try to do that. So and our panelists know that, so if we move along, that's why. And I understand there will be an opportunity for League members to ask questions in just a few minutes here. So I really, again, appreciate the League putting the spotlight on this issue, as I know my fellow panelists do as well. So, Mitchell, I really wanted to start with you. The lack of affordable housing in this region has been a persistent problem that has worsened in recent years. Give us, first of all, just kind of a 30,000-foot status update of where we are and what the need is like.
Sure. Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon, everybody. Really, our housing crisis that we are experiencing today really has a lot of roots in the Great Recession. because the Great Recession really devastated not just the existing housing stock with the amount of foreclosures, but it really just halted any construction of new housing. And it took many years for new production of housing to start up again. But when they started up, they didn't start up building, the small starter homes. We actually lost that vocabulary word. Nobody ever talks about starter homes anymore. And so we really have not produced the kind of homes that we did pre the Great Recession, even today. We've never exceeded the production levels that we had before the Great Recession. So we've always been in a deficit. And then, home prices, land costs, construction materials definitely made the idea of home ownership less of an option for a lot of people in our community with low to moderate incomes and even middle incomes now. And then, of course, we had the rental crisis that we've experienced since COVID. And it's going to take a PhD professor to try to figure out what all elements came together to create that. But it's really been, devastating, not just to our community, but a lot of communities around the country. So what we're trying to do in Orange County is we're not waiting for, the national lifeline. We're not waiting for the state. We're trying to be proactive and do things on our own to get some of our housing production up.
And so, Ryan, how do you kind of briefly define the housing crisis from where you sit? And
Sure.
Jerry, same question for you.
Yep. Ryan Von Weller, Wendover Housing. Thank you all for having me, and good afternoon. We are primarily affordable housing developers, which means that a majority of what we do encompasses the use of federal tax credits, state subsidies from Orange County, various different funding pots in order to make housing truly affordable. So when we say we develop affordable housing, most of our units have a hard cap at about 60% of the area's median income, which is calculated annually by HUD for the metropolitan area. We can't charge more than what HUD tells us we can charge, and we can't have residents that make more than the threshold that HUD sets for us. So what we're doing is actually creating units that have a very defined resident and a very defined rent structure, which is different than attainable housing and workforce housing, which you all also probably hear as well. So when we see and hear about the crisis and everything that are going on, as Mitchell mentioned, we've got a lack of all types of housing that aren't at the very upper end of the spectrum. Downtown Orlando has seen a rebirth in the last few years, with the majority of the housing being luxury apartments, very high-end, high-rise, and even the suburban areas are starting to have, rents $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 a month. You should not be spending more than 30% of your gross income on rent and housing annually, which means that if you're going to spend $3,000 a month, do the math, you must be making $100,000 a year in order to be comfortably into attainable housing, which is not happening. So you're seeing the growth of the Central Florida marketplace, the growth of the multifamily market, but you're not seeing a commensurate growth in affordable housing. And a lot of the reasons for that, lack of financing, lack of resources, not because of what Mitchell's not doing, because he's doing a great job with the things that are handed down, but there's only so many things we can do with the resources that are allocated annually.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for having us here. And thanks to the League for having the conversation about such an important topic. And we asked the question, we talk about this housing crisis, and we talked collectively several days ago about how do we define that? And we all come from different worlds. Mitchell's working for the county government. Ryan's working for a developer. I ran theme parks for 30 years, and now I'm just a guy working in the community. So none of it makes sense. But about 10 years ago, I was on a board at Florida Citrus Sports, and a group of leaders, business leaders, got together and asked that same question. The question was, how could we as a community invest over $200 million in Camping World Stadium at the time? It was the Orange Bowl, the Citrus Bowl. How could we invest that amount of money in a stadium, in a city without a football team, and not try to address some of the issues around the community? So a group of us got together and developed what we defined as a very holistic approach to addressing generational concentrated poverty, which housing just happens to be a part of the problem. It's not the solution, it's part of the problem. So as we talk through that, we realize that we have to make sure that we as a group, as leaders, agree on the definition, whether it's how to address housing, health, education, and other things that are associated with poverty. And again, through the years, I've met these gentlemen and learned more about housing than I ever imagined. But really, it's a complicated issue. Housing is not simply housing. It's all the things from financing to affordability and jobs and access.
All right. And so, of course, we are here today to talk about solutions. We think that's a really important part of the conversation. And we know Orange County has convened a task force about housing, and the county has taken some action on some of those recommendations, such as creating the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So far, the county has also approved a half dozen new rental projects that will add a combined 1,000 or so units, along with a nonprofit that will build 24 townhomes. So, Mitchell, back to you. Is that enough? And isn't the state as a whole still feeling the effects of the legislature's repeated raiding of the state's Sadowski Housing Trust Fund? We all know about $2.3 billion has moved out of that fund in the last 20 years.
So let me address your last question about the state legislature and the rating of the trust fund, which has continuously occurred. To my surprise, it's in some years when we were like so desperate for any money to go towards housing, there would be years where we would get $0. And so it was incredible. But this year they did pass an act called Local Live Act, SB, SB 102, thank you. And it was a major commitment to housing. I mean, they really fully funded the trust fund. They increased their state money for their sale program, which is an affordable incentive financing for affordable apartments. And they made a 10-year commitment that they would fully fund these programs for 10 years. And if the trust fund even fell short based on, real estate taxes that go into the fund, they would make up the difference with general revenue. So it was a major commitment. In terms of what we're doing in the county, the results of the task force was that we produced a plan. And like other task forces I've been on in previous years, the task force leaders and staff, we wanted something more than just a report. We wanted something that was actionable. So we came up with a 10-year action plan, and it's called Housing for All, because it's to address not just affordable housing, but all levels of housing. Because in our community, not just, we just don't need affordable housing. We need moderately priced housing. We need middle income housing. We need to get out of the extremes of building large expensive homes and luxury apartments. That's kind of been our mode. And so this is an attempt to get through that and to encourage a more diversified housing stock. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
And that's a really nice segue into the next question, which is specific to the Live Local Act that was signed into law this year. I believe the number is about $711 million invested into housing, down payment assistance, and support for military communities. So one question, though, and Ryan, maybe you can speak to this, is that enough? What are some of the positive and negatives of that particular piece of legislation?
Sure. So the short answer is no, it's never enough, right? But if you don't try, if you don't take the steps, you're never going to get anywhere. So what we're seeing still in the state of Florida today, and I'll hit on SB 102 specifically in a minute. Today, with every affordable housing unit that's built, we're still losing more units faster than we're building them. And the reason why that's happening is because when I build an affordable housing community today, I'm restricted for 50 years to keep that project affordable, right? It's a land use restriction. I can't change it. It's impossible. 20 years ago, that was a 15-year restriction. So what you're seeing through the year 2025 is going to be continuing units converting from affordable to market rate, which of course the owners will do and sell it or change it and get more rent. And so we're actually operating at a current deficit annually, even though we're ramping up production. So that's the first issue at hand. Now, what SB 102 did in the last 30 years, which 30 years ago I wasn't paying attention to this, obviously, but what's happened was the state neglected to take action. The rating of Sadowski Fund, the changes in different legislative activities that didn't encourage affordable housing to the right level, to the right people, to the right areas. SB 102 has really reallocated the responsibility to create large-scale developments on local governments, on local employers, and on the private sector as well. So we have tools now that we didn't have 6 months ago, or actually we don't have them yet till July 1, but we didn't have the ability to do a lot of things that this bill is going to encourage. Now inside of that bill, there's sales tax breaks, there's ad valorem tax breaks, there's zoning changes that we are allowed to do now that we don't have to go through a rezone and a comprehensive plan change to build affordable housing on certain zone sites. So all those things encourage the creation of affordable housing in areas that previously was not possible.
Yeah, and those are some really interesting points. I think, though, we're going to hear later about how some of those very allowances are also going to likely cause some tension with local governments and how people want to see their neighborhoods developed. Terry, did you want to add anything?
I think what you're hearing is just this idea of public-private partnerships, which is really the key. And that's what innovation is all about, because we cannot rely on government to find all the solutions. Developers alone cannot find the solutions. And private businesses now are getting into the game. And two great examples in our community are Universal Studios and Disney. They have both donated land to build housing on. They're working with developers. Universal is working with Wendover to create 1,000 units that are located in the jobs market right there off I-Drive near the convention center. So where there's jobs, where there's transportation, and that's a holistic approach, and it only happens with public-private partnerships. And that's really what I believe is going to be our solution going forward.
And that has been a big part of the equation for Lift Orlando as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that project's initial goals were and kind of where you're at right now?
Well, Lift Orlando started about 10 years ago in 2013, and we had this crazy dream of trying to take as business leaders, work with residents, not come in and tell them how to fix things, but work with residents. We engaged residents. We had community meetings and asked the residents what did they want in their community and how can we help. And believe it or not, they told us. It was really easy. And our job was to go and find resources because we had connections, we had credibility, we had the ability to make things happen. And it became this public-private partnership, working with the city and the county to identify sources and resources to build housing and other facilities that the community said they wanted. And to date, we've been sort of influenced over $100 million of investment in one community. And the whole idea is think globally, but act locally. And so we're a community-based organization focused on one community.
Thank you for that. And Ryan, so let's go back to Universal. I know a lot of readers of the Orlando Sentinel here, I hope. You know, we had some up close and personal stories. I got a really firsthand view through some of the work we did on low-wage workers at the theme parks, people having to drive many, many miles to get to work, people taking the bus for hours to get to work, some people even sleeping in their cars after shifts. Universal reached out to Wendover or put out a RFP for a developer, and you all were the successful candidate there. So tell us a little bit about how you're working with Universal and what that project is going to be like.
Certainly. So as Beth mentioned, we went through an RFP process. Universal put this out to the entire country, first with a very brief RFQ and then following up with a more in-depth RFP, and we were narrowed down from 17 to 5 and then ultimately selected to build the development alongside of land Universal donated to us. So we're actually right next door to the convention center. So if you can imagine 20 acres next to the convention center, the value of that property, probably around $30 million. Now Universal gave that to us for $10. So when you do that for 99 years, it's a land lease. But when you do that, that changes the entire dynamic of the capital structure of your project. So with that in hand, we're able to go out and create 1,000 units, as was mentioned. So we have 600 truly affordable units, utilizing all various sources of government financing and various other whatever else we could cobble together. We have 14 layers of financing on this development. And then we have 400 workforce units. So the 600 units will be affordable for 99 years, all of them will be. And the workforce will be capped at 100% AMI voluntarily by us. So that project was able to also draw in private equity from New York City. Now, to do that, you got to meet in IRR thresholds, and I won't bore you with all the details, but institutional equity does not typically invest in workforce and affordable housing. But the notoriety this project gained, the location, the scope, the scale, in conjunction with the units, we're also providing Jeff Bezos' academy, which is a Montessori preschool, which is free, that they're funding. We've got community health centers, which I know some folks in here are involved in, providing a federally qualified health center on site. UCF's running classrooms, Orange County Public Schools. So what we're trying to do is create a community. And 20 acres is not a huge site to get 1,000 units plus all these other amenities on. But what we've been able to do is to create a sense of community and being. There's 75,000 workers coming into this corridor every day. And when Epic opens, that number is going to go to 100,000. So 100,000 people are coming into work at different places every day here. And what you're looking at is the longest commute times of links of anywhere else in their system. So you've got kind of a double-edged sword here. And 1,000 units is a lot. We're very proud to be a part of it, but again, drop in the bucket as to what's needed.
And what do you know so far? What can you tell us about the demand for that particular development? Because, you're still not done yet.
Well, I can speak about demand. When we built our first 200 units for Lift Orlando on the west side, just off of Orange Center Boulevard, 200 units, all 70% affordable. Within several months, we had over 10,000 applicants for 200 units. And I remember 6 months before opening, we were all having anxiety attacks about, do we need to advertise to get people here? We didn't advertise.
And this, Catchlight Crossings, which is the name of our development, is not for Universal's employees. I want to stress that as well. So Universal donated the land, but this is not dedicated only to Universal employees. There will be some that live there, but hotel workers, iDrive workers, other tourism events, anybody that qualifies that wants to live there can. It's a fair housing issue as well. So, we're going to probably see a lot of applicants. We have interest from hoteliers already. Can I reserve 200 units? No, you can't. We appreciate it very much, though. But, it's going to be filled very rapidly, and the demand far exceeds the unit availability, as we all know.
Yeah, the location is so excellent for so many workers. And we also, Walt Disney World has also committed to a project. I believe the last thing I noted on that was they would build 1,400 units by 2026, closer to the Disney property. So how important is it for these large employers to become involved? We've talked a little bit about partnerships so far. And also, does this represent a bit of a sea change to see these big name theme parks begin to address the problem head on?
I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be large employers. I think at this point, and I remember 10 years ago when our group got together at Lift Orlando, it wasn't about the large employers. It's about individuals that felt a sense of responsibility and wanted to be part of the solution versus sitting around all day talking about the problem and pointing fingers. And I think that's what Universal's team did. Disney's team is doing the same thing. And it doesn't matter how many employees you have. If you have resources, access, or just a heart for it, you should get involved in some way. And I think that's more important. And that's what drives innovation, and that's what drives solutions to some of these challenges we have.
So I think that, Disney and Universal had representatives on our task force, and they, they saw our plan, they saw our message, they saw that what we were trying to do. But I think it does send a big message nationwide to have two large employers donate sizable properties for the purpose of affordable housing. Disney is actually going to be developing the property themselves. They're going to be paying for their own developer. and they're going to finance it themselves. They're not asking the government for anything and no waivers or anything. They're just going to do this project.
And so, Mitchell and Ryan, those are all really positive developments for the community. What are some of the biggest challenges still on the horizon, and what are some of the barriers left out there for more of this kind of work?
We hit on it a bit earlier. The financing that's available, even though it's increased multifold due to the Senate bill, the federal government's taking action. We hope this calendar year still as well to increase the resources we need. But you've got locally and hyper-locally even, you've got issues, local governments, you've got neighbors that don't want affordable housing development. I deal with it all the time. Someone asked me the other day, how often do you see this? I said, I'm 100 for 100. It never ends. Whether it's going to be an ongoing issue or it's gonna pop up at some point, you can bet your bottom dollar you're gonna see it. That's an issue. You've sometimes got local governments that don't want your product there. They don't want it in this location. They want it somewhere else, which of course also inhibits the ability to build it. Land costs are increasing. Construction costs are increasing. Inflation is causing interest rates to increase, right? So we've got a perfect storm. What used to cost us to build a unit about $120,000 maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit more, is now over $200,000 a unit. So when you see that dramatic of an increase, our rent structure is capped, as we've already kind of discussed. You can't increase your rent commensurate with the cost increases like a market rate community could do. So instead of charging $1,800, now you charge $1,900, make up for your expenses that have been outlaid. For us, we get a finite bucket of money and it's build and operate or you're out of business. So it's a real challenge to find qualifying sites, which will hopefully be eased up by the Live Local Act, and to get the financing in place that's needed to build in today's environment.
And Mitchell, go ahead.
So as Ryan says, we can figure out the formula for building affordable rental housing, and once we can find a way to close those gaps. But one of the things that we struggle with as a county, is the affordable homeownership opportunities. They're just extremely lacking, and they're extremely hard to do because they're financing something for long term, 30, 50 years. How do you build a product that you can sell when the average, price of a home in Orange County is over $300,000? We are actually been working on a project for almost 2 years now with an organization that some of you will know, a Hannibal Square Community Land Trust, is now a countywide land trust, and we are doing a project with them in Apopka in the CRA district, and it's going to be 24 townhomes. The cost of those units will be, expensive, probably between $250,000 and $300,000. But we're layering a lot of different subsidies that they applied for, some federal and state funds, and we have committed a sizable amount of funding to try to bring those prices down to anywhere from, $160,000 to, I believe, $240,000. And they're going to be sold to people making 80% of the median or less. So that's, low to moderate income families. But that's just one example.
And how many units?
It's 24.
Right.
So to just mention what else can we do? I mean, Orange County is working on, changing our codes. The Vision 2050 plan, I think that a lot of people will have heard about and read about. And that's, how do we simplify our code? We are operating on a suburban code from the 1950s. So it's difficult to get a diversified housing stock when you have a suburban housing code. So, the 2050 vision plan, some of the form-based code recommendations that the planning will be bringing to the board over the summer is to make our code more friendly to diversify our housing stock, not build a trendy tiny home. I mean, that's not the solution. But, Winter Park has a lot of small, beautiful homes, and they have a lot of large, beautiful homes, all right? And so does downtown Orlando neighborhoods. How to get back to those days where you can build a variety of housing types and not everybody freak out that that's going to destroy my neighborhood.
Terry.
Just to add, when you asked the question about challenges, and the challenges are not just the challenges of the county government or city government or the developers, the challenges are our challenges. And you often hear people say that your blessing can sometimes be your burden. We're in Orlando, Central Florida, great place. Over 70 million visitors each year, number one destination in the country. We want to be number one in the world. But with all that comes a burden. We have a tourism industry that's large, and not all of the people that work in the tourism industry make a livable wage. So we have all of these blessings and burdens that we have. So it's our problems that we have to navigate. I like to remind people of one thing that I've watched over the years is the Alice report that United Way puts out, and it talks about the fact that about 47% of our neighbors are living on the edge. I mean, some are working 2-3 jobs, but living on the edge. That's our problem as a community. So we can't turn to the government for everything. So as we leave and think about this housing issue, it's not as simple as just housing. It's us as citizens really understanding what we all can do to support other neighbors.
And so that's an excellent point, and it leads right into something I wanted to talk about that all three of you, I think, kind of touched on earlier. And, I've sat through many local government meetings in my life, and I think a constant theme in a lot of those are the kind of the NIMBY cries. Does everybody know what that is? The not in my backyard. We hear that a lot at local government meetings, and with good reason. There's always excellent arguments on both sides or all of the many faceted sides of that. But what can the community do, the leadership do, to help many others in the community understand that multi-story units, multi-unit housing, that those types of developments are part of the solution usually?
Yeah, I think there's 3 words that I've used over the last few years that worked well in the work, community work at Lift Orlando was education, engagement, and empowerment. And those 3 things in that order, because often citizens or neighbors are living in fear because of what they don't understand. I can remember sitting in community meetings and talking about building 200 units of apartments in West Lakes community, and the neighbors weren't happy about it. And they used the right words. They made it clear that they were not happy. But when we talked about what could be the impact if we don't bring more population into that area, what would it do to the elementary school that might not have enough population? What does it mean for the economy in the community? And that education process, but also that engagement and empowerment, because the residents were involved in the design and they're involved in the operation of the apartments. So they know what's going on. So they don't feel like it's those people living in my neighborhood. They are neighbors.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think education of the product type is critical, again, and also with the nomenclature. So you're seeing people start calling it attainable housing, workforce housing, and changing it away from affordable. When I go into a commission meeting, a lot of times you say affordable housing, first thing they think of is Section 8. It's going to be a 2-story dilapidated building. It's going to bring down my property values. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and there's no way I'm going to let it happen. If you went by one of our communities or one of our competitors' communities here in town, you would have no idea that it was an affordable housing community versus a market rate community. None. It's amenitized the same way. It's kept the same way. It's landscaped the same way. There's no discernible difference except for the amount of rent we charge to live there. And a lot of elected officials statewide, I'm going up all the way to Tallahassee, even inside the Florida Housing Finance Committee in many cases, and all the way down to local governments. Many elected officials have never been to an affordable housing community. And when they get up on the dais and speak, we don't want this, or I agree with this person got up and said, yeah, this is not the right fit for that, or not the right location, etc. They're speaking from a place that is not educated as to what we're actually proposing and what we're actually trying to do. And I can't tell you how many developments we've actually finished and opened, and the people that were opposed to it, that voted against us, are there on the grand opening shaking hands and smiling. It goes on every time. It's constant. And so you got to just take it with a grain of salt up front, but sometimes it inhibits you from being able to move forward in a timely fashion, which of course is also frustrating. So, getting a better grip, not only as the elected officials and staff, but also as a community as to what we're actually building, what the product type is, what it looks like, is going to be critical to us moving forward.
So I agree with my colleagues. You hear about NIMBY, but there is a new group called YesBe, I believe. Yes in my backyard. And I didn't actually believe it, but they wanted to have a meeting with me. And so there is such a group. And they have shown up at the county commission in support of an affordable housing project or just a housing project that made a lot of sense. And so, yes, we do need more advocacy. We need more understanding of what is going to be built. And we have to get away from the fear factor of anything called affordable. Because, as Ryan said, you can't tell the difference when you walk into these apartments that's an affordable versus a market rate. It's the same granite countertop, the same amenities. It's just the rent structure is different. And the same with, other type of housing that we hope will be encouraged, like, smaller homes. Not everybody needs a 3,000 or 2,500 square foot home. And a lot of the next generation would love to have a smaller home near transportation, connected to Wi-Fi all the time and Bluetooth. And so we have to think of the future and how we're going to build, a diversified housing stock for the next generation.
And transportation, such a big issue. I don't think we can talk about housing without talking about transportation. What do you see as a way forward there? And obviously that's been a huge priority of Mayor Demings and some other leaders here in Central Florida. How is that going to look as we go forward?
So transportation is Mayor Demings, one of his strongest pillars that he wanted to have accomplished in this term. And even though the sales tax did not pass, he's not giving up on pursuing different avenues to move forward on transportation projects. And he always talks about transportation and housing and how we connect the two. And that's what we've done in a lot of our affordable housing RFPs, that, money we might put out in the street for the private sector to develop. We want those areas, we want those projects to be targeted in areas we call access and opportunity. And that means it's close to transportation, it's in transportation corridors, it's close to job centers, it's close to food, you're not in a food desert. And so we score proposals based on, some of that criteria. And that came out of the work of the task force and some of the committees we have. So yes, connecting transportation to housing is something we're working on and something the administration continues to work.
And Terry, you led that work on the task force. What was kind of your perspective coming out of that?
Well, the task force, I was one of the co-chairs along with Alan Keene. And there were 4 key areas that we focused on. Was one, regulatory issues, and the staff did a great job of identifying potential barriers. The other was creating financial resources, and the county did that and now funding the $100 million fund? $160 million fund to help developers, incentivize them, and the access and opportunity, targeting the right places. But it all goes back to this holistic approach to housing. It's one thing to build incredible housing 50 miles outside of town, but that no one can get to. But it's another thing to build it right here in town or along a transportation corridor. And we have to think about not just those people that go to work every day. If you look at the data, we're getting older. So I am, some of you not. I'm getting older, so I don't want to embarrass you. I'm getting older. But we've got to think about our senior soldiers that one day may not be able to go to work every day, but still deserve to have a high quality of life. And we built a senior facility on the west side of Orlando, in our area, Woodlift, Orlando, 120 units, all affordable. And whenever I go in that building, I just get goosebumps because I see the high level of engagement, all the amenities. We have seniors supporting each other, and some are still working, but most are there and they're very active, and we provide all those amenities. We have social workers, we have healthcare workers. So it's all of those things, not just a building.
That's right. And Ryan, can you talk about what you see from project to project when one is more accessible transportation-wise than perhaps another?
Yeah, certainly. So it goes back, and we started working on TOD, transit-oriented development, about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And we've built a market rate community at the Longwood Sunrail Station, an affordable senior community at the Longwood Sunrail Station, and Terry is spot on. I mean, the senior citizens that live in that community do more than our management team does. Not because we're not trying, but I mean, they're organizing themselves, they're checking on themselves, they've got all sorts of events, and they're scheduling. They usually have someone that takes the lead and is running the entire show there, which is wonderful, and that's the case at all of our communities. We've got another market rate job, under construction workforce job at the Kissimmee Sunrail Station. And so what we've been able to do is really witness firsthand how the availability and the mobility makes a difference in not only seniors' lives, but families' lives as well. You know, owning a car in Central Florida is a right to most of us. Everyone thinks I got to have a car, right? Because you can't get from A to B without driving. Now, a car is a very expensive undertaking. So as you might imagine, if you have two cars, they have two jobs, you know, two parents, whatever it may be, a couple, they've got to have double that up, right? So they're paying a lot of money, maybe as much as rent in cars, gas, insurance, etc. So when you have transportation available and it goes to places that they need to be, and you're putting the affordable housing and workforce housing in locations close by where people want to be, as Terry and Mitchell both mentioned, that makes all the difference in the world. So you see a much bigger impact the lives of the residents the closer you are to transportation. And I'll close with the Federal Transit Authority. When they look at giving grants and monies out, one of their caveats is, are you providing workforce and affordable housing around this development, around this project that you're asking us for money for? They see it. The state of Florida sees it. And, you know, we're very, very willing and able to provide housing around these stops as well.
And there's two more points I want to get to before we open up to questions from members here. We've talked a little bit about the legislature, some changes made for the good and for the bad this year. And we've been talking a lot during this conversation about government perspective, developers perspective. I want to talk a little bit about tenant perspective. We know a bill out of the legislature this year preempted local governments from creating tenants' bills of rights. How important is it for local governments to be able to do that? And how important is it for developers and people who run these communities to provide a good experience to the tenant?
I love that question. I love it because I'm working with great developers, and Wendover is one of those, and we have a partner called Columbia Residential, which we consider great. When you work with great developers that have great property management teams, you don't need the county or the city to tell you what to do. You do it already. Should the county and the city be able to do it for those landlords or those owners that might not have the same expectations or don't treat their residents with the same level of dignity? Yes, we need the county and the city to have the ability to do it. The great thing is having great developers that live in our community that understand that these are our neighbors that we're serving. So we need more of that.
We don't deal with properties that are in need of rent control, as we've already kind of discussed. So even our market rate product is priced below, you know, what we would call high-end luxury. So, you know, when you hear governments talk about rent control, different things, every study I could show you that says it's a good idea, someone else has one that says it's a bad idea, right? So there's been success stories, there's been catastrophic failures. I think the main thing to look at, you know, what the state of Florida was trying to prevent is artificially creating barriers for people to develop, right? So let's say Orange County said you can't charge more than $2,200 a month in rent, whatever. You're going to drive out a lot of people, developers, for the good or for the bad, from building. If they can't afford to build, and there's a market rate developer that's got, you know, they've got investors, they've got shareholders, whatever it may be, they have to meet certain expectations and criteria. And if you tell them you can't make more money than X, they're going to say, you know, I'm going to go to Tampa, right? Bottom line. So that's the main crux of the issue. Obviously, with what we do as our core business, we're rent controlling ourselves effectively with government guidance. So that's not an issue we delve too much into, but certainly we'd like to see the market, especially here in Central Florida, cool down to a point where people aren't overstressed and cannot find a place to live that they can afford at this point. That's happening to a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys hear about that every day in the newspaper and everywhere else. Actively searching for a place even 10 miles away from your employer that I can afford to live at has become a challenge.
So in terms of what the county tried to accomplish, there was several ordinances that it took to board to approve. And one of them was to control rent for 1 year based on, emergency situation. And that one was going to be a tough one to, withstand legal challenges. But that was one aspect that they were trying to achieve. The other was a tenant bill of rights that the board passed. And that bill really was to foster and require better communication between the landlord and the tenant about what their rights are from the landlord side and from the tenant side. And it was
Right, because some of those protections were very basic, like written notice before a
very
rent
basic.
increase.
Very
not
basic.
necessarily all the way up to rent control,
Right.
which was also an issue.
Right.
But what was also getting thrown out are some of the most basic protections
correct.
for people.
And that was so it was a separate. I was a little surprised that they were so interested in what we were proposing because we had brought it to the Apartment Association of Central Florida and they were okay with it. I mean, the first drafts maybe, there were things that we didn't have clear, but what was taken to the board and passed, Apartment Association was okay with it. Actually, they said they do most of that stuff already.
Right.
So, that was really to get all the landlords on the same page. And we still have an Office of Tenant Services that we created, and that's probably still going to stay in play and to continue that education and outreach for both landlords and tenants.
All right. And so we're going to do a quick lightning round to close this out before we open it up to all of you. People here in the audience today are most likely here because they want to be part of the solution. They want to learn more. So quickly, could each of you give us what do you hope the takeaway is from this conversation, and what can people do to help? Does anybody want to start? Terry, you want to start?
I'll start. I'm the farthest away and safest. So I would say, one of the thoughts that goes through my head often is the city beautiful is not beautiful for everybody. And we have to remember that. And I'm hopeful that events like this will convince more people, regardless of what industry or you come from or what vocation you have, you can get involved in some way to make a difference. And housing is one of those spaces. You don't have to be a developer. You don't have to be a builder or work for the government. But there are ways to get involved in the community. And we need more people that are experienced in and what I call just negotiating, deal making, communicating, the things that oftentimes the people that live in communities don't have those skills, and they become very vulnerable. And that's why a lot of these things happen.
I think getting engaged, as Terry just mentioned, is the most critical thing. About a month or so back, the Sentinel reached out to me and asked me to write something about SB 102 for an opinion piece, which I did, but of course I didn't write about what they wanted me to write about. They still published it, so it couldn't have been that bad. But the gist of what I was saying and what I stand by is that we've got the resources in place now from the state, so we can't complain that no one's paying attention to this issue, right? People are paying attention. People are doing things, but we've got to have community engagement. Like, everyone's got to be involved in this process, whether it's hyper-local in your neighborhood, the 2 blocks where you live in, if it's your city, if it's your county, if it's local businesses, everybody, local governments, major employers. Everybody has got to have a vested interest in seeing this through, or else we're going to be having this conversation in 10 years and we're not going to be in any better shape.
So in terms of the new bill that the legislature passed, It was the largest financial commitment to affordable housing in over 30 years. So let's not lose sight that they actually did something extremely positive. But there are things in this bill that are going to be good for the communities, and there are things in this bill that will have to be tweaked in the future. Because there is some pre-exemptions on zoning and land use that cities and counties are not going to be happy with, because it's a little too broad. And so there has to be effort to get those tweaked and get them corrected. But from a local perspective, we're trying a huge comp plan, 2050 comp plan. We're trying to switch to a form-based code. Those are big, huge endeavors. They've been working on this for years, and now it's coming to it. It's being brought to the community. It's gonna have an up and a down vote this summer whether to move that to the state. But those plans offer an opportunity for us to grow differently than we had in the past, and so it's going to take a lot of encouragement and advocacy and support to get those over the finish line.
All right. Well, thank you to all three of you. And I believe we are going to open up now to audience questions.
Thank you, Pat. And quick announcement for overtime. Our panel has agreed to join us. So if we don't get to your question, we'll continue later. Yay, thank you. But here's a question. A lot of us would say we're not quite yet at a first-tier city here in Orlando, Central Florida, because we're lacking what I would call efficient rail transit transportation, as we talked about. We certainly have an airport. But soon we'll get there. And as we look around the country, I'd like to ask each of you, where should we look for the model of where we want to be when we get there as kind of a city that's almost on the cusp when it comes to transportation and housing, a bus system, a rail system, is it Greenville, is it Lexington, is it Tampa, is it Delray Beach?
As a retired business leader, still involved in a lot of things in the community, I would say what I had to learn years ago coming to Orlando is that Orlando is a very young city compared to most major cities. Very young. I think 50 years ago, it was citrus town. A lot of citrus drove what happened in this community. 50 years back, Disney shows up, interstates show up, population grows, tourism grows. Now it's tourism, and we're evolving from tourism to technology and all the other great things, assets that we have. I often am reminded that sometimes we overrate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in a decade. If we start thinking longer term on some of these issues, we would all agree to invest bigger and bolder, and transportation just happens to be one of them. The mayor tried to get the tax approved for transportation. For whatever reason, it didn't pass, whether people didn't vote for it. But it's one of those things we need to think in terms of decades, because 10 years will go by very fast.
I think you hit it right in the head there, Terry. I've been here my entire life, and when I was a kid, links didn't exist, right? You could have asked me 10 years ago where Horizons West was. I would have just looked around the map. I had no idea what you were talking about. We're growing at such a rapid rate here. We may be behind the curve a little bit. Sunrail being delayed for the 5 years it was, and other areas like Charlotte getting our money gave them a head start to see some developments in TOD, some north-south connectivity, and redevelop around those areas. Now, you're seeing here now, I don't think there's a Sunrail station left that doesn't have development around it. The core ones in downtown have the hospitals already, but Tupperware's got like hundreds and hundreds of units around it. We own 2 of them. We've done units around them. So you're starting to see the connectivity, all those things come into place. Of course, the funding needs to be available for links to expand as well, because I think we all understand that's got to grow and be more comprehensive. But what we're doing with the Sunshine Corridor, hopefully with connectivity to the airport from the iDrive area, will be a big boon for us as well.
Okay, thank you. My name is Susan Adams, League Government Committee, and I'd like to ask Mr. Glasser especially on the Vision 2050. There are community meetings going on right now around the county concerning this Vision 2050. But the plan has been around for a couple of years at least, and we've probably all given feedback on it. But my question is, how do you believe that the Live Local Act could markedly affect Vision 2050 in terms of the building heights, the zoning changes there, and also the parking accessibility? While you're getting to that, I just want to remind the league members that Government Committee also has Observer Corps as part of its function, and you can keep up with yes, you can keep up on our website. Observer Corps has reports from several years, and the last year we've had 15 involving affordable housing. So if you want to get quick review of what has been done, that's the place to go. Now, I'm sorry, Mr. Glasser. Thank you.
So I don't have my AICP license, so I'm not a certified planner, but I know that the county is analyzing what the changes in the legislature are in terms of how it might affect our Vision 2050 plan, and does it actually give a developer even more ability to develop either a taller building somewhere else, or have the right to build affordable apartments in an industrial area and commercial area, which some of those rights have been given to them in this act. So they're studying it. That from what I've heard, they don't think it's going to impact that much, but in some cities that have tall buildings like Orlando, and you go out a mile radius, that has the potential. So that's where I said there's some things in this law that are going to need to be discussed and tweaked in the future. I think, Ryan will tell you as a developer. I mean, most developers, they want to build a product, and that product, they want it to be the right thing, because whether they're renting or they're selling, they have to appeal to a market. But it's a good question. They're going to be still have a lot of meetings, and they'll be coming to this area, and that's a good question to those planners when they're in the room.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Marty Sullivan. I'm a longtime league member, and my question concerns Senate Bill 102, Live Local Act. It's encouraging to hear, and my concern are the zoning preemptions that exist for municipalities. And Mr. Prather, I appreciate that there will be some tweaks to these. In our small city of Winter Park, I do have some concerns, and particularly before those tweaks come in. I mean, it's another preemptions come down the pike at us, and we are trying to figure out how to deal with it. I assume that if a developer comes ahead right now with a permit, it'll be under the current statutes. And perhaps future tweaks will adjust it to better fit our city, which is pretty much built out, but it does create some development opportunities. Mr. Von Weller, I wanted to ask, do you think within Winter Park there will be development applications to do this, and what kind of impact do you see this having on our city?
Sure. As you know, I live here as well, right? So I've kept a keen eye on what's going on locally. As you mentioned, the law comes into place on July 1st, which is obviously state statute, which has to be abided by. Now, you're going to have people attempt to drive a truck through this thing, right? That's what happens anytime something gets enacted that's new and different. Someone's going to try to figure out a way to make a boatload of money. Now, keep in mind that the land use changes and the density allowances and ability to build a commercial industrial are only for projects that either are entirely affordable or have a large affordable component. So what I think you're going to see ultimately in the short term, someone will attempt this, right? It's going to happen. I'm not sure it's going to pencil out the way they think it's going to pencil out. To have an acre here in Winter Park and try to do 80 units and keep 30 of them affordable, which may have to be the case, I don't think is a workable business model. Now, maybe someone will come to that and say, give me this anyway, and I'm going to do it. Ultimately, I think that the market will weed that out. I can't say that for certain, but we've looked at multiple different ways now people are approaching this. I don't see how they're going to get there. But the tweaks that are going to occur aren't going to be necessarily next year. We've been meeting with the Senate President's Office, with the sponsor of SB 102 in the Senate, and they're looking to modify this at any point that someone comes to them with a question or a concern, as long as it's validated in their mind that this is something that's going to benefit, because they don't want this to be a disaster either, right? I mean, they want this to be beneficial for everybody. And so they're going to be constantly taking a look, and there may be special sessions, there may be special ways to do it that can change it. But I do think in the very near term, there are going to be people that attempt to really take advantage of this and not understand the full repercussions. Certainly.
Okay, and do we have time for one more question? Okay, one.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Kay.
I'm Kylie.
We are from the UCF League. I'm president and she's vice president. We just have a quick question regarding students. I mean, we hear about students all the time, like this is a population of people that probably need this more than anybody. You said to get involved and get engaged. How do you recommend that students do that?
One of the challenges with affordable housing, the model that we use, right, is you can't be a full-time student and occupy a unit. You have to have certain income. You have to be able to pay the rent. And students are typically, unless they live with an adult, student housing doesn't work under the program that we operate under, right? Now, there are various things going on. I was on a ULI panel with some of the folks here working on some affordable housing solutions for students and different things a month or so back. So it is happening. There is a solution path forward. I don't know what that is today, but it's not. What we do as a core business doesn't apply to full-time students, unfortunately.
But as far as getting involved, there's a number of nonprofits that you can, connect with and become members, or in some places try to become board members so that you can not only be involved but have a voice. So that's what I would recommend.
I would also recommend that you find the YesBe organization, because they seem to be about your age when they came to see me, and they were very active and growing, and they want to do some grassroots stuff. So I would recommend contacting them.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. That's our last question. And if everybody could just stay seated for a few moments, we have a couple announcements from Barbara Lanning, immediate past president.
Thank you so much. It was nice to hear some rays of sunshine amidst what is usually a pretty dark and cloudy picture. So I want to thank our panel, thank Beth for taking us through a great deal of information. I think we all learned something, and I feel a little better. So, I do have a few announcements. First of all, we want to remind you, Samia is here from our housing over here, so you can get with her. Also, we talked about transportation. Theo Webster is here from our transportation committee. I see a future of you two perhaps collaborating now. So, it's nice to come and listen, but it's even better to take action, and here are some ways you can get involved. As far as taking action, you can also sign some petitions. Over here, we have the Clean Water petition, and we also have the petition to put abortion on the ballot for the 2024 election. Both of them are there. The League of Women Voters has joined a coalition to get those petitions signed. So step over there, sign it, and we'll take care of sending it in for you. You don't even have to do that. Let's see. We also want to remind you, of course, to be voter ready. So everybody here, I'm sure, has already done this, but please go online, check your voter registration, and make sure if you want to vote by mail, you have updated that, because all of the vote by mail requests expired December 31st of last year. So we also want to invite you to become a volunteer, to donate, become a community partner. So if you're a guest today and not already a member of the league, the QR codes on this slide are active, and I guess you can shoot it from your chair and go right there. Is that right? Okay, let's see. We already talked about the Hot Topics overtime. It's going to be on the second floor. In the past, sometimes they've been downstairs, so just make sure you know that. There's also an evaluation for today's Hot Topics. Get your phones out again, because there's another QR code that you can shoot. I don't know the... Okay, everything's good. We're good. There is a QR code for that as well. Okay. And so everything's okay? Yeah. Okay, and our next Hot Topics, the next Hot Topics will be August the 9th. As many of you know, it's our league tradition. We take July off. Even the strongest volunteers need to recharge a little. So our next Hot Topics is August the 9th, and the title is Superhero Buildings, Our Secret Weapon to Save the Planet. And if that doesn't pique your interest, I don't know what will. Because I'm all about the superheroes. And then, as we know, Monday is Juneteenth. So check our website for some events in the community. There's also next week the Stay Woke Rally. That's June the 20th from 1 to 5 p.m. at Lake Lorna Doone Park. And there's also a virtual new member orientation on Tuesday, July 18th at 6:30 p.m. So you can go on the events calendar and get the information on that. So if there's nothing else, we now stand adjourned. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, thank you to our panelists for a really wonderful program.